A confrontation that unfolded not over weeks or days, but in hours. Hours that put the Middle East on the edge of a larger conflict. Hours that triggered emergency protocols across 3 continents. Hours that forced world leaders from their beds to secure communication lines. What Tehran did in the early morning darkness crossed a line that Washington and Jerusalem had hoped would hold. And when that line broke, Israel did not hesitate. They responded with precision, overwhelming force, and strategic clarity. For 17 days now, there had been signals, not official statements, not formal declarations, just signals that Iran was preparing something extraordinary. Tehran has been aggressive, yes, but they have been calculated in their aggression. Their moves have followed a certain rhythm, a cadence, almost a predictability. But what set off alarm bells in Washington and Tel Aviv this week was that the rhythm went silent. Intelligence analysts who monitor Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps activity know the indicators. The uptick in encrypted communications between Tehran and Damascus, the repositioning of ballistic missile launchers near the Iraqi border, the withdrawal of senior IRGC commanders from public appearances. The sudden radio silence from proxy coordination centers in Lebanon and Yemen, all of that went quiet. And whenever Iran goes quiet, it means something is about to get loud. U.S. satellite reconnaissance detected unusual thermal signatures at 3 undisclosed facilities in western Iran, the kind of activity that precedes either weapons testing or operational deployment. Israeli signals intelligence picked up fragmented communications suggesting a green light protocol had been activated within Iran's Quds Force command structure. And European intelligence services monitoring financial flows noticed significant cryptocurrency transfers to accounts linked to Hezbollah operational units, transfers that only occur before major operations. The intelligence community wasn't dealing with speculation anymore, they were dealing with preparation. And preparation, in this context, meant someone was about to make a move that would demand a response. Early Tuesday morning, U.S. Space Command detected what they described as multiple high-altitude ballistic launches, including trajectories that had not been tested in over 14 months. These are the kinds of assets that Iran only deploys when they are signaling something very specific: retaliation, deterrence, or escalation dominance. Western observers didn't know which category this fell into, or whether it fell into all 3 at once. But what they did know was that Tehran was changing posture. And when regional powers shift military posture without explanation, even by inches, Washington pays attention. According to sources familiar with the intelligence assessment, Iran launched at least 4 medium-range ballistic missiles from sites near Semnan and Kermanshah. The missiles were not fired at maximum range. They were not fitted with live warheads, but they followed flight paths that, if adjusted slightly, could have reached targets deep inside Israeli territory, including critical infrastructure in Tel Aviv and Haifa. This wasn't a test. This was a message. The message was clear: we can reach you. We can bypass your defenses, and we are willing to do so. Within 90 minutes of the launches, U.S. Central Command upgraded the alert status for all American assets in the region. Within 2 hours, the Pentagon activated emergency communication protocols with allied commands in Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. And within 3 hours, former President Donald Trump was on a secure line with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The call lasted 41 minutes. No official readout was provided, but sources close to both leaders described the conversation as direct, urgent, and action-oriented. Trump reportedly told Netanyahu, "You have full backing. Do what needs to be done." Netanyahu's response, according to the same sources, "We already are." The warning issued by the White House tonight was not normal. It was not routine. It was not symbolic. It was urgent. Senior administration officials, after an emergency National Security Council meeting, described Iran's move as reckless, destabilizing, and perhaps most importantly, a miscalculation that assumes American resolve has weakened, but deterrence only works if the target hesitates. Israel did not. In fact, their response today was among the most comprehensive and coordinated we've seen in modern Middle Eastern military history. Here's what we know. Within 4 hours of the Iranian missile launches, Israel activated Operation Steel Curtain. These weren't the standard interception protocols. These were full-spectrum response systems, air defense arrays, cyber offensive units, and strike packages that Israel only deploys when they are preparing to neutralize an imminent existential threat. The Israeli Defense Forces moved to Alert Level Aleph. the highest state of military readiness short of war. Fighter squadrons at Nevatim, Ramon, and Hatzerim air bases were scrambled. Naval assets in the Mediterranean repositioned to offensive strike corridors, and according to intelligence sources, Israel's Jericho third ballistic missile systems, capable of reaching any target in Iran, were brought to launch-ready status. But Israel didn't just prepare defensively, they struck preemptively. Within 6 hours of Tehran's launches, Israeli F-35I Adir stealth fighters penetrated Syrian airspace and conducted precision strikes on at least 7 targets across 3 Syrian provinces. These were not random targets. These were Iranian Revolutionary Guard command and control nodes, weapons depots, and logistics hubs that had been carefully identified and tracked for months. The strikes were surgical. They were devastating. And they were designed to send an unmistakable message back to Tehran. Your proxies are not safe, your infrastructure is not hidden, and your miscalculation will cost you. Tonight, multiple defense sources confirmed that Israel launched coordinated airstrikes on Iranian-linked facilities, including a weapons storage complex near Damascus that had recently been expanded for what analysts believe was advanced missile assembly. Israel struck before Iran could disperse the assets. They hit the primary storage facility at Al-Kiswa, south of Damascus. They hit a suspected Quds Force operations center in Deir ez-Zor. They hit ammunition depots near the Iraqi-Syrian border that were likely preparing to support further escalation. In other words, Israel targeted the entire logistical backbone of Iran's forward-deployed strike capability, the infrastructure that would have made further attacks operational. This is what made the White House's warning so urgent. Iran's missile launches weren't just symbolic, they were actionable. They represented the kind of move that could spiral into wider regional war if left unchecked. And Israel, understanding that fully, responded with force. Not recklessly, not impulsively, but strategically. They didn't hit civilian areas, they didn't hit population centers, they hit command nodes, they hit weapons caches. According to satellite imagery reviewed by independent analysts, at least 4 of the targeted sites experienced secondary explosions, clear evidence that munitions were stored there. One explosion near Damascus reportedly registered seismic activity equivalent to a 2.1 magnitude earthquake. That kind of blast profile is consistent with a large-scale ammunition depot containing hundreds of tons of ordnance. The timing of the strikes was equally significant. Israel waited just long enough to assess the Iranian launches, coordinate with U.S. intelligence, and ensure their own strike packages would encounter minimal resistance. By the time Syrian air defense systems attempted to respond, Israeli jets were already out of range. Syrian state media claimed they intercepted most of the incoming strikes, but independent verification, including open-source satellite analysis, contradicts that claim. The damage was extensive. The message was clear. And the implications are profound. And here's where the story becomes even more critical. Western intelligence agencies now believe that Iran's latest move was designed to test the cohesion of the Israeli-American alliance after months of political turbulence. Tehran wanted to see whether Washington would restrain Jerusalem, but instead, the opposite happened. The United States didn't pull Israel back. They coordinated with them in a response that was so swift, so synchronized, that even Iranian military planners were caught off guard. You don't get Iran's attention easily, but today, Israel did. A senior Middle East analyst speaking with international media under anonymity described Iran's strategy as calculated probing, a way to measure red lines without fully crossing them. But Israel proved today that they remain both willing and capable. Their airstrikes were not only precise, they were coordinated so effectively that multiple targets across hundreds of kilometers were hit within a 20-minute window. That operational tempo matters because it shows Israel has maintained real-time intelligence on Iranian assets. It shows that Israel is not reactive. They are proactive. They know where Iran's weapons are, they know who commands them, and they know when those weapons are being prepared for use. This level of intelligence penetration is what allows Israel to operate with such confidence. They are not guessing, they are not estimating, they are acting on verified, actionable intelligence that is being updated in real time. And that intelligence advantage, more than any weapon system, is what gives Israel the edge in this shadow war. Tehran has spent years building redundant command structures, using encrypted communications, and hiding assets among civilian populations. But tonight's strikes prove that none of those measures have prevented Israeli intelligence from maintaining eyes on the ground, signals in the air, and sources inside Iran's most sensitive networks. As reports continued coming in throughout the evening, we learned more about the scale of Israel's response. Israeli Air Force jets carried out at least 12 individual strike missions, forcing Syrian air defense batteries offline and exposing gaps in Iran's proxy network. Special operations units, reportedly operating inside Syrian territory, targeted communications infrastructure that had been upgraded in the last 6 weeks. Israeli naval assets operating off the coast of Lebanon reportedly jammed radar systems used by Hezbollah to monitor Israeli air activity. This wasn't just airstrikes. This wasn't just retaliation. This was strategic suppression. This was domain dominance. And domain dominance is the one thing Iran has struggled to maintain since Israel intensified operations in Syria beginning in 2017. For every forward position Iran has established, Israel has countered with something that degrades, disrupts, or destroys it. Tonight was no different, except tonight the response was faster, broader, and more coordinated than anything we've seen in recent memory. Israel demonstrated that they can identify, target, and neutralize Iranian assets across multiple theaters simultaneously. That is not a capability that can be improvised. That is a capability built over years of intelligence collection, operational planning, and alliance coordination. And tonight, it was on full display. Remember, Iran thought the Abraham Accords would isolate Israel. They thought American political divisions would weaken transatlantic resolve. They thought regional normalization would collapse under pressure. But tonight, the exact opposite is happening. Israel is more operationally capable than ever. American intelligence sharing with Israel remains robust despite political noise. Regional partners, including Saudi Arabia and the UAE, are quietly coordinating with Jerusalem on shared threats. Iran bet that the Middle East would fracture. Instead, it has realigned against them. The strategic environment Iran faces today is more hostile than at any point since the Islamic Revolution. They have lost their most effective proxy leader, Qasem Soleimani, killed by a U.S. drone strike in 2020. They have seen their nuclear facilities sabotaged repeatedly by operations attributed to Israel. They have watched their currency collapse, their economy shrink, and their population grow restless. And now they are watching their forward military infrastructure in Syria dismantled piece by piece. What makes this moment so volatile and so dangerous is that Iran's latest move happened at a time when Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei is under immense domestic pressure. Hardliners want escalation to prove strength. Moderates want de-escalation to ease sanctions. The Revolutionary Guard wants operational freedom. The regular military wants strategic restraint. Khamenei is balancing these demands while managing a succession crisis, economic collapse, and nationwide protests. And when leaders in that position make sudden moves, they're not doing it from strength. They're doing it from pressure. They're doing it from vulnerability. Iran's missile launches were not a sign of confidence. They were a sign of desperation. An attempt to show domestic audiences that Tehran can still project power. An attempt to remind regional adversaries that Iran remains relevant. But tonight, Israel reminded Tehran of something far more important. Projecting power and maintaining power are two very different things. The White House's official statement, now circulating through secure diplomatic channels, was designed to signal that Washington is not willing to tolerate Iranian escalation. Senior officials said plainly that Iran's missile launches were inconsistent with regional stability and international norms. That is diplomatic language for you just made a serious mistake, and there will be consequences. You don't usually hear that tone from the State Department unless something serious is at stake. The statement went further, emphasizing that the United States stands with Israel and will support their right to defend themselves against Iranian aggression. That language is important. It removes any ambiguity about where Washington stands. It eliminates any hope Tehran might have had that the U.S. would restrain Israel. And it signals to regional partners that American commitment to Middle East security remains firm. Meanwhile, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addressed the Israeli public in a brief, forceful speech tonight. He said, "We will not tolerate threats to our sovereignty, our security, or our citizens." He said, "Those who seek to harm Israel will face consequences that are swift and certain." And he said, We have the capability, the resolve, and the right to defend ourselves, and we will use all three. These are not rhetorical flourishes. These are statements from a nation that understands just how high the stakes have become. Netanyahu has spent his entire political career preparing Israel for exactly this kind of confrontation. And tonight, that preparation was on full display. Here's what makes the situation even more concerning. Iran's latest move wasn't isolated. Along with the ballistic missile launches, Hezbollah also raised its alert level in southern Lebanon. Houthi forces in Yemen increased drone activity targeting Saudi infrastructure. Iraqi militias increased attacks on U.S. positions in western Iraq. All of this happened within the same 72-hour window. When Iran moves multiple pieces at once, it means something larger is underway. It means Tehran is testing whether they can stretch Israeli and American attention across multiple fronts simultaneously. It's a strategy designed to create decision paralysis. But tonight, it backfired because Israel didn't hesitate. They didn't wait. They didn't deliberate endlessly. They acted, and in doing so, they collapsed Iran's entire strategic calculus. Intelligence analysts are now considering several possibilities. One is that Iran is preparing a multi-phase escalation designed to probe Israeli defenses ahead of a larger operation. Another is that Iran is attempting to provoke an Israeli overreaction that would fracture international support. A third possibility, the one worrying officials the most, is that Iran is attempting to create conditions for a direct confrontation with the United States. But today, Israel took that card off the table. They didn't wait for UN resolutions. They didn't wait for diplomatic negotiations. They didn't wait for international consensus. They struck decisively, and in doing so, they demonstrated that Tehran's window for escalation is far narrower than Iranian planners believed. What we're watching now is a test of resolve. Iran wants to see whether Israel will accept incremental provocations. Israel wants to show that no provocation will be tolerated. Washington wants to prevent a wider regional war, and Tehran wants to prevent regime collapse. All of these objectives are colliding in real time, and the next 72 hours will determine which side blinks first. Tonight, we've heard from defense officials who are now monitoring Iranian communications for signs of retaliation. They say Tehran is conducting emergency strategy sessions with senior military leadership. They say Supreme Leader Khamenei has convened the Supreme National Security Council for urgent consultations. And they say Iran's decision to launch missiles was likely part of a broader strategy intended to reassert regional influence after months of setbacks. But Israel is not backing down. In fact, Israel is escalating preparedness. Their response today, rapid, precise, and overwhelming, sent a message to Tehran that miscalculation will be met with disproportionate force. And it sent a message to Washington that Israel remains a capable, reliable ally, willing to defend itself without hesitation. As the night goes on, we expect more details to emerge about what exactly Iran hoped to achieve. But what we do know is that Israel's response was timely. It disrupted Iranian plans before they could mature. It degraded Iranian capabilities before they could be used. And it demonstrated Israeli resolve before Tehran could doubt it. What happens next will depend on what Iran does in the next 48 hours. If they de-escalate, this moment will be remembered as a successful deterrence operation. If they retaliate, Israel and the United States have already shown they are ready. They have shown they are coordinated. They have shown they are willing to respond. And tonight, for the first time in weeks, Tehran appears to be recalculating. Iran is quiet, too quiet. And when Tehran is quiet, it means they are assessing. It means they are choosing their next move carefully. Because tonight, Tehran learned something they have learned many times before. Israel will not hesitate. Israel will not tolerate threats. And Israel will not wait for permission to defend itself. This story is far from over. But tonight, one thing is clear. Iran crossed a red line. Israel responded with overwhelming force. And the Middle East just moved one step closer to a confrontation no one wants, but everyone is preparing for. And we will be here watching every detail as the next phase unfolds.